welcome, as Jerry said, and this is just kind of an informal discussion, so if you wanted to just kind of share you've had a lot of questions, and I know you've been taking notes about connections, so maybe you just kind of want to share reflections and what you're currently doing.
Sure. I guess I can answer questions specifically about this work, and I can tell you a little bit about this work briefly. And then I wanted to talk about briefly again and about another project that I just installed in Ontario, which is called Agaming Awasakwa on the riverbanks across the river, which is about the storing of pet coke, storage of pet coke on the Detroit River. But in here, there's a couple different projects. All of these prints are one called Michif Michin, which in my kind of father's paternal language, ancestral language, also called Michif, means the people of medicine, and they're all a series. I've been over the last few years, I'm very interested. My great-grandmother was an herbalist, and knew this knowledge, and I'm very interested in what happens, why knowledge is not passed down and through various colonial processes and urbanization and such. So this is a project I've been doing for some time now, last 2 years I guess. Last summer I was living in the Yukon. I was in residency at the Klondike Institute of Arts and Culture, and basically I spent the entire summer meeting with people. It's on the traditional lands of the Trondike-Wet'suwet'en, so meeting with community members there, harvesting, beginning to understand some of the boreal and subarctic plants, some of which grow here, particularly in the Upper Peninsula, some which were unfamiliar to me. And so all of the prints here, it's a longer term project. I've done some prints. There's a book up front which is called Tikibin Buskigamigag, the place where the water boils up, or Spring Grove, which looks at a site in Flint, which is a kind of a post-industrial site where I made a book and a 90-minute film telling the history of that site, the indigenous history of that site, and then looking at the different medicinal and edible plants that grow on the site. And so these were all plants that are harvested in the Yukon. So usually, as Chris was passing around before, they kind of give the impression of being very similar to dried plants that are then rolled in ink and then pressed as you would do in a elementary school project, but they're actually small relief prints, and then the inks are all made through berries that I harvest. So initially I had harvested some blackberries, which in British Columbia, which were an invasive Himalayan blackberry, not a native blackberry in the region. But if you've spent time, say, in Seattle or Vancouver in the summer, they just kind of take over. These blackberry brambles take over entire spaces. And there's a wonderful writing thinking about kind of ecological writings, and I can't think of his name right now, but a writer who teaches at Simon Fraser in Vancouver, who's talked about blackberry brambles as the commons, because they're this space where everyone goes to pick berries and nobody in their right mind would actually pay for berries. And they're kind of this shared commodity, not a commodity, I guess they haven't been commodified, shared entity that we all kind of partake in. So the inks were from blackberries initially that I harvested in Vancouver while I was doing a project there at UBC, and then I basically make inks of the part of kind of harvesting is also making inks from the berries that I harvest. So there's of this series, there's I think 27 different prints. I think 20 of them are up in here at the moment. There's some others that I haven't shown, and I've also done some based on kind of mid-Michigan species as well, blackberries, arrowhead, cattail, etc. Ones that are both edible and or medicinal. So that's the print project. The bikes, which are at the front and the back, are part of a longer term project I have going on called Native Kids Ride Bikes, or Anishinaabensa Beamscoebshigawag, Native Kids Ride Bikes, which was initially funded through the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, and it's a collaboration primarily with urban Native youth building bicycles based on community knowledge. And so the two here, oddly enough, were also built in Vancouver, although a few years previous to the harvesting of the berries. So I do these workshops, and I've done them throughout the US and Canada, collaborating primarily, like I said, with urban Native communities, building these bikes, thinking about knowledge, thinking about sustainable transportation, thinking about health, all of these multi-layered things going into the work. So that's kind of the work that's in here. And then most recently I just finished an installation for an exhibition curated by Shramoyi Mitra, and it's called Border Cultures 3. And once a year over the last 3 years, she's curated these exhibitions about both the U.S.-Canada border, but mostly about global borders and the global borders between nation states and kind of the collapsing and/or reification of them. And so for this, I did an installation and series of photographs dealing with pet coke and the way that on the Detroit River there's now these big piles of pet coke. And I took stills from basically a found YouTube video of a storm in the summer of 2013 that created this huge, immense cloud that covered the whole area. Took these stills, these very kind of beautiful stills. For me, they looked like, I don't know if anyone's familiar with, there's a famous painting by J.M.W. Turner, who's a British Romanticist painter from the mid-19th century, and it's called Slavers Throwing Overboard the Dead and Dying. And it's this beautiful, horrific, romantic painting, but it's a slave ship with this amazingly multicolored sunset, and there's just all these bodies being thrown into the water. And the composition of these photographs, these stills from this video I found, actually, to me, began to allude to that. So basically it's a series of 6 photographs, as well as a 20-foot by 4 or so foot dock that was built in the gallery using found and reclaimed shipping pallets. So I wanted to think about commerce, I wanted to think about the function of the border, I wanted to think about the way that pet coke gets from tar sands, gets processed, gets left there, and then the interconnectedness of the border and the way that these clouds actually cross that border, whether or not it has a passport. So that's I guess kind of thinking about setting up the conversation. My work thinks about these things. It looks at the ecological history, the function of the border, the indigenous understandings of place. All of these perform themselves or play out in the work.
Is that something that's that you're showing right now? That's already been installed?
I just installed it 2 weekends ago. It opened last Friday. So yeah.
And where is that again?
It's at the Art Gallery of Windsor. So it's a beautiful space, nice museum. Looks actually right on riverfront in Windsor, so it's kind of directly across from the GM headquarters. What is that? The Renaissance Center. It's not called the Renaissance Center anymore. It's called the GM building, I think, or something of that nature. But yeah, directly across from that.
Dylan, you're talking about clouds. Were they storm clouds or were they clouds of dust?
They're basically, yeah, the dust and the summer, yeah. So in a big,
off.
yeah. So it's basically picking up all of the kind of the loose particles, putting it up in the air, and so it creates this luminous cloud, and you can both see the bridge, but you can't see the bridge from Riverfront Park in Windsor.
Wow, so much symbolism in that. Did you write down the story of what you just told us, or is there a video narrative? How do you share the narrative with
How do I
people?
communicate in an exhibition?
Yeah.
I guess that's the thing as an artist. How much do you communicate? How much do you leave open for interpretation with audiences? And I'm somewhere in the middle because I'm also a curator and art historian and critic. I like to give a little information. So this text you see in front of me, which is about a fairly long paragraph, that actually kind of with the information about me as an artist goes alongside it. So some of the background can be gleaned if a viewer is so inclined to
Go deeper.
Go deeper.
How does that relate to what you do in Great Lakes Echo? You have just to contrast the different processes. You leave things open for the viewer to create their own meaning out of, right? Providing a framework. How's that different for journalists covering the Great Lakes?
Yeah, it's definitely, we try to incorporate, whenever something's unclear, left up for interpretation, my boss is find out what they mean. It's basically you have to, and if it's something that we don't understand, we have to kind of break it down so that someone that doesn't necessarily know much about environmental journalism and that kind of science, if they don't know things what that kind of stuff means, you have to break it down into ways that people, everyone can understand and kind of just make it specific, because it's very much we have to pin down exactly what, as specifically as possible what someone's trying to say.
So you don't wanna have any ambiguity in that.
No, yeah, I mean,
Which is almost what you want in an artwork.
right, exactly.
You want to be able to see it on its surface. You can look at these, say, oh, they're beautiful, they're interesting. The longer you look, you start seeing other things with the bikes. If you want to get access to those other histories and cultural kind of relevance, you can get into that. But you can, with the ambiguity, you can kind of enter it at different levels.
You know, the project I did with a course that was on Isle Royale National Park about the ecology and our ability to observe. The instructor whom I was observing asked students, I was the researcher, so asked students to look at plants or a tree or a limb and make drawings and, you know, do this close observation practice. You know, but from multiple perspectives.
Right.
And to look and go take the draw, you know, look at the plant at this level and draw it here, and then look at it at a smaller, at a little bit distance, and then draw it again, and then walk away half a mile or something like that and draw it again, and you start to see how, I mean, the exercise was a challenge in perspective. It was a work to, with all due respect to journalism, to undo that shared way of knowing. And it was, you know, just from the individual standpoint. So and a lot of my work, a lot of my assessment work of student learning takes a similar approach. I walk around the student and try to figure out what they know from different points of view. But I'm wondering how that concept plays into journalism, to art, and what do we,
Advocacy.
does it help?
Photography.
I mean, my wife tells me it's a super pain in the butt. You know, 'cause I'm always having 4 conversations at the same time. I don't know if that's useful or not.
I know for sure that the reason that so my husband and I we co-founded together the organizations that I was mentioning, and we were English majors here at MSU, and our main focus as undergraduates was poetry writing. And a lot of times when people found out our background and what we did for work, which was all book related, they were, so, and how did you become activists? And but what we immediately discovered, and to me this is inspiring and encouraging, and it relates to journalism for sure, is that one thing we could do was build a story, and people really like to tell stories and hear stories, especially about places and people that they know and care about. And I don't think it's an oversimplification to say that a major thing, for lack of a better word, that we did at the beginning was write the narrative that people could begin to tell about what was happening to the land. And then the narrative took on a life of its own and has now been informed by literally hundreds of people who know the land. And so and I think I'll stop talking because I'd love to have somebody else kind of.
That's important though, because when there's some ambiguity about something that you have such passion about, and it's clearly important to not just people who live in Saugatuck, but the entire Great Lakes. You have to start that storyline. You have to start telling that story, otherwise you're not going to understand the ramifications or the consequences of what everybody does on a daily basis, or developers are planning to do for decades. I think you have to. I mean, I think that's an important, terribly important ability to put that narrative forward in front of people so they can start to enjoy and appreciate that story.
The thing that was shocking was the number of people who didn't see it until they heard the story, who really didn't. Well, what's the big deal? What are you so worried about?
Too close to it, maybe?
I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. People are busy, right? Trying to make a living as a big thing, taking care of their kids, worrying about things that are right in front of them. And one of the things that book, we try to do with that book is to give people a little bit of breathing room, to step back for a minute. And I'm guessing that's what you do with your photographs. I'm sorry, I didn't get to see your exhibit, but I'm imagining that it's a similar invitation to reflect, engage,
Sure, absolutely.
just like your exhibit.
In the same way that you do, Daniel, with more news pieces, and how it's a short thing. It's little bits of information you're trying to engage people, and that's a challenge for anybody to start, for the general public to start we've all become so desensitized because we're just knocked over the head by so much information, visual or journalism. And how do you find that? How do you crack that level of interest and engagement? That's the challenge for everybody.
I think it's interesting how it ties back to perspective though. Without that narrative, you might not understand how it connects to you. I mean, maybe as a teen, you love to go to the beach. Right? You know, that's what you love to do. So that's your field of view, right? That's your perspective. That's what you have. And if in the narrative it talks about, that might go away, or that might be compromised, or this or that may happen, that could be a trigger for you to say, ooh, I need to care about this. I mean, it could be something as simple as that. I find a lot of times when when you're thinking about something, you're obviously looking at it from your set of experiences, your interactions with something, your understanding or misunderstanding of what that thing may be. And then when you hear a story, or you see a story, or you read a story, or however you interact with that, you say, I never thought about it from that perspective. And so I think that's where the narrative is a big piece of that, to kind of bring it home for someone, to say, I see that's important.
I think telling, especially just telling stories, and like my parents, I don't know, I guess I'm like the lone wolf in my family. I'm like very environmentally oriented and all that kind of thing. And when I say like, I'm gonna go recycle, they kind of laugh at me and are like, haha, like why should I care? And it's sort of, there are obviously, there are many, many more people out there, and we live in the Great Lakes where it seems like there's water everywhere, and that's not really a concern, but it's not a reason to waste it. Or, if I see someone watering their lawns and it's raining, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? And how, because at least in my work, it's not always a creative art or stories, but we really need to do that, because I think that's how you can connect to these other audiences, I guess, or underserved or underrepresented audience, different groups of people, because a lot of it, it's like, how do you get someone to care? And we work a lot with agriculture, and they're very, producers in general tend to be very, very sensitive, and kind of like, I don't want to talk to anybody from the government, I'm skeptical of you, and how can you engage them in a conversation and just start there? And I really like the storytelling piece, whether it's in narrative form, artwork, or what have you. But at least for me, I was excited to come here and kind of see that different avenue.
It's interesting that story is kind of, it's all coming from the idea of story, because I know your work's Nuestros Cuentos, your header is all about story, and I'm really interested in stories. And it's weird because contemporary art by and large is kind of almost anti-narrative. That if you go into a contemporary art exhibition in most kind of global art centers, the work will not be narrative. It's intentionally not telling a story. Which also could be why kind of in regional centers and places around the world there's not that much interest in it. Because works don't tell stories anymore. And as humans, there's something I think fundamental about us having interest in stories and such.
Yeah, so the project that I was asked to present here is this project called Nuestros Cuentos, and it does that. It's storytelling. It's a storytelling project with Lansing's Latino 4th, 5th, and 6th grade youth. And it's a way of them talking about their environment, their community, and sharing their stories through their perspective, because a lot of times the narrative of Michigan in general seems to omit the presence of the Latinos and the presence of like the Native community, or talks about them as if they're in the past. And so the project really it continues to be, it's a storytelling project where we get the youth to talk about the issues that are important to them and what a community looks like and how they see community and how they see family. And what we've had 3 iterations of this project, and it continues to grow, and I'll be doing another project in the spring of 2016. It'll bring in Native and Latino elders. So it's grown, so it'll be truly intergenerational, where we'll have 10 to 80-year-olds participating in the storytelling project, through the storytelling, through video, and through illustrations. But it's a way, I think what we're seeing is that as we're having teachers and principals read the kids' stories, they're starting to pick up on some things. They're starting to see the community through the eyes of these particular children, right? They're seeing the way that these children are navigating some very difficult situations and how they don't see themselves as victims, but they see themselves as survivors. And that this is their reality, and they're celebrating those moments. And so I think it's interesting that you have to, the way that we look at community isn't often through the eyes or through of children, and how amazing the landscape looks when you engage in the conversation, right? I think that's how you are able to enter some of those difficult conversations with people who are very dead set in their ways or see the landscape in a very particular lens because this is how they've always seen it. But to have a child talk about the landscape might help them reconnect to those years of their teenhood, right? It might help them reconnect to some of those moments that they had as a child. It might pull on those heartstrings, so it might be able to open their eyes and their ears just a bit more. So, yeah.
You're just reminding me of something that I'm so grateful you reminded me of. We had at least two different high school student videos made about the landscape that I've been involved with, and it's so powerful, so powerful. One of the videos, I think you can access them from our website, but one of the videos is well shot, but not real. It's not super polished, you know what I mean? So, but it's well done. And then they just child after child coming up on the screen, and then in the landscape itself. So there's, you have different perspectives of the landscape, and the child is just saying, "This is our future." Child after child says, "This is our future. This is our future. This is my future. This is my future." And it wasn't my idea from beginning to end. The whole project was done by high school students, and we passed it out. We just made copies of it and passed it out to anybody who would take it. You're so right about children being able to, I don't know, I'm going to sound like a Thoreauvian right now, but child worshiping and the old people don't know anything, but I think elders are extremely important, but children do have a way of getting right to some things we can take a little more time to get to.
It's fun to see the interaction between the elders and the children, though. That's a pretty special combination.
Maybe it's us middle-aged people.
I think so.
End
of conversation. Let's just
I think you're right. I think we're too busy living our lives in the moment. We're trying to just make it through the day that we aren't thinking, we just aren't thinking about, we're not thinking through the lens of what used to be or what will be. We're just thinking about what is right now. And it's not giving us the space to be reflective or,
And that's a bill of goods. I mean, I think we've been sold that and sold up the river on that one. With context included here. I know, but as I'm in my 30s, I got kids, I got the house, I got the car, I got all the stuff, right? All the trappings, and they're traps. They're just, because it creates this pressure to pay attention to those things. So, right, you got all these payments to make, you gotta do it on time, you gotta make sure you go to church, all this stuff.
So how do you do it? You maintain a pretty good
Well,
perspective.
it's hard
What's the
to
secret?
maintain perspective. It's difficult for me to maintain perspective like this, and to find space for reflection, and to do things that matter to children and generations. And it's also easy to see it, and I'm a white male from the suburbs. It's easy to see people like myself making decisions about children and older people that don't benefit those people. And it's easy to see my peers. And so I think we do get, as a middle-aged group, whatever, this group that is sort of in.
Speak for yourself.
But there's a dominant voice in that group, and that dominant voice, I think, supersedes through all the different channels, through media, I think to some degree through art, through our institutions. I'm part of it. I'm not trying to say I'm not, but I think that dominant voice maintains the narrative for us. And if you're not critical, if you're not careful, then you just become part of it. You don't question it. You don't make pretty books. And I mean that in a very helpful way. That connect us to our, our memories.
I might be wrong about this, but I feel like I've heard that the millennials actually, their dream isn't the house in the suburbs with 2 cars, and I've heard that is actually going away as a.
It's a good thing because a lot of them are in poverty.
Yeah.
They have no choice.
A lot of these late 20s, early 30s people are in.
I'm not trying to scare you.
How do you feel about that?
Hey, Allison, with due respect on the generational research, the millennial stuff we hear is a lot about kids of dominant group and privilege.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take into account the students and the kids you're working with from marginalized backgrounds. It doesn't take into account
College
experience.
students.
It takes into account college students and really the people who can afford to go to college. And I mean, so when the research is done on these like generational things, we don't talk to plumbers who are millennials. We don't talk to people who went to trade schools or people from the military. We don't talk to them. So I just want to be
That's why I
really
asked it as
critical
a
of that.
question.
Yeah. And the college kids they're graduating with a lot of debt and not a lot of job prospects, so they're more or less in poverty.
How do we, I guess,
we
engage
know
these,
that?
these underrepresented groups? That's something like in my work, if I go to like a state meeting, it's all white people,
Yeah.
and it's something that, I mean, it's just really sad to me that it's like that. Even my fiance, he's at a PhD program at state, and it's an education program, really great, and there's like this like de facto, the black people are one group, and then there's the white people, and even when they hold events and invite everybody, it still just splits, and it just seems like a very unfortunate and sad thing. How do we, I don't know, move the ball forward? And I don't know if any of your work speaks to that with the work you've been doing with the Latino community, but that's just been something that's been on my mind.
Like how my work helps race
bridges.
relations.
Yeah.
It's really, to be quite honest, I'm not concerned about the white people.
Good.
I'm really not. I'm concerned about my communities that their voices have not been part of the conversation. They've not been invited to the tables. They've not been part of those surveys. I'm very much invested in having them tell our story, and I'm not. I don't look at kids as future leaders. I say they're leaders now. I don't look at them as I'm not trying to empower because that's disempowering. I'm not concerned about the white people can be okay, right? I mean, structures are set in place for them to be okay. I'm concerned about making sure that the 60% or the 30, let me say this, the 40% high school retention rate, that's unacceptable. And so I'm concerned about getting those kids through 5th grade through 6th grade in high school and getting them here so they can start creating the spaces in your husband's boyfriend, sorry.
No.
Yeah, PhD, so that there's more representation, there's different perspectives, there's different voices, not just racially, ethnically, class, I mean, coming from urban, suburban, rural places. So there's there's different perspectives in all of those spaces, and for me right now I'm like I need to focus on my communities and getting those stories and those perspectives out there so they are no longer sort of pushed to the side.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about Michigan and we're talking about Lansing, we're really recognizing the importance of the Latino and the Native communities, because I feel like the way that we talk about race relations is very much a black-white issue, and we're not understanding that there's variations in those stories, and these other communities need to be part of that conversation. And so I'm very much, for me, it's important that their voices are also part of those stories.
And to take it back to kind of
Can we just widen our circle for a second? Break the screen of thought, and then here's
you got to introduce
Come
yourself,
on in.
Mark.
Dan Mark.
I'm Dylan, my half brother.
By way of Ireland. My name is Mark Sullivan.
David. I'm in the College of Music, and I taught in the RCAH until recently. Taught photography over there and some other things. And I've also worked with Kurt and with MSU Global on getting artists active in their innovation discussions.
Glad you could join us.
Thank you. It's nice being told you. It's one of the best lies I ever told.
What we discovered in Saugatuck is that, so Allegheny County is one of the poorest counties in Michigan, and it's very white, but it has very, very deep rural poverty. And what shocked us, because we are so naive and very sheltered in so many ways, were how many of the people who were not well off, who felt like they literally did not know enough to know what should happen to the land. And so when we started listening to them, it was incredible. I mean, there was a strong streak of the rich people know what they're doing, so they will make the right choices. Mm-hmm. And which, of course, that was like gobbledygook. That wasn't even within the realm of comprehension for us because we were privileged. And we knew that rich people actually really could screw things up. And so when I talk about the storytelling that went on, a lot of it was from people who I don't believe had ever felt like they had anything to say that anybody would listen to. And then the flip side of that is, guess what? There are a lot of rich people who do care and who did want to hear and who were ready to step up. And it's fairly emotional time because it was right after September 11th when the whole thing started. And I'm here to tell you that people of all religious persuasions, political persuasions, socioeconomic backgrounds, it was all very easy, age, everything. It was very easy for them to come together on this piece of land and what was being suggested for it. And it was powerful to watch what could happen.
You mentioned something important, and I was going to mention when Estrella was talking, listening. Because I think for stories to exist, there has to be, they're active and they're about dialogue. They go two ways. There's a teller and a listener, and you have to listen. And maybe that's part of kind of how you deal with this issue is the process of listening. And for me as an artist, part of what I hope to do is actually look and listen to non-human things and what they may say. It may sound kind of strange, but part of this was about actually listening to the plants. And I lived for a few weeks this summer on Rabbit Island, which is a small island about 4 miles off the coast of the Keweenaw. And part of that was listening to the island, listening to the trees, listening to the water. And I think that's what, as an artist, I can do, right? And maybe I was teaching today in my class. Our students were looking at botanical drawings of the last few hundred years, and I had them do their own botanical drawings, but rather of the food that they had in their own food system. So they went to their dorms and were drawing fun-sized Milky Way bars and Cheez-Its and whatever food was in their dorm, thinking about that and their relationship to that. And that's what, as an artist, you kind of have that ability. It wasn't about, and even with these prints, it wasn't about making them as scientific documents that could easily kind of be recognizable. It was about listening to them and trying to then speak back, whatever that means.
Actually, there's a really cool article in yesterday's NPR online called "Listening to the Glaciers" and what they're telling us. And actually, scientists have been doing this project for 30 months, and they've discovered that every glacier has its own particular signature sounds. And there's a difference between things that happen underwater or things that are underwater and above and things that are above. And so they've got like 80 families of sound happenings. And I thought that's a really cool example of exactly what you're talking about.
And that's crazy because this summer when I was on Rabbit Island, a friend of mine, Suzanne Morissette, who's a Métis artist originally from Winnipeg in Toronto now, she actually did a project where she used contact microphones and listened to the shore around the island. So dragged these mics, and it's not the most beautiful sound. But it's kind of listening to what the lake shore says.
Mica when you did a thing there once, right?
That one wasn't, but there might have been some.
Wonderful.
I have some audio pieces that were there, yeah.
There's somebody at MSU who studies that. Are they in
Stuart
here?
Gage.
Stuart Gage.
Stuart still doing that?
Yeah, it's called the Virtual Ecology Group. They just put out a study on how snowmobile noise causes damage in environments, eco-environments. He's had a partnership with some guy at Purdue for 20 years.
Yeah, they were also trying to
They have a
use,
website too. It's
use a
called
sound
Acoustic
signature.
Ecology.
Yeah.
Acoustic ecology.
Acoustic ecology. They're trying to use, when Soji Analajo was still here in the Land Policy Institute, he was writing a paper, I remember, I guess it was Stuart Gage, because they were trying to create what's the sound signature of a sustainable landscape. And they were trying to, they were like taking little sound signatures from different places, you know, parking lots, urban settings, woods, you know, shorelines, all different settings, and trying to understand if there were any similarities in what they would categorize as a sustainable landscape, that so that you could just use audio to catalog the environment. So I don't know where that research ended up. I just thought that was a really interesting way to listen. Yeah.
It strikes me though that, Laura, your question is about how do we listen. One of the things that I have to do in human environments, especially as I study organization, is ask or respond to the question intellectually, whose voice is valid, whose voice counts. And so one of the conversations that comes up a lot in outdoor education is, who's involved. And frankly, it's like in the National Outdoor Leadership School, it's kids who can afford it, and those kids come from a certain kind of background, or adults or whomever, or value it. As an adult, I found time and money to go do that kind of thing. But so the diversity and inclusion are often paired together in higher ed and in these sort of educational, and it's often the approach or the strategy of an organization to say, well, we're going to go get diversity, and that's what they do. They recruit, they spend money, and they find ways to get different looking people. But what they don't do is create inclusion. And so I heard this conversation totally flipped by a scholar, an anthropologist from the University of Washington, Ava Holliday, about outdoor education. And her approach is to create inclusion, and you'll get diversity. And so it was about figuring out whose voice is valid. How do we know things? Can we listen to the environment? Can we listen to the data that are telling us? Do we only look at certain kinds of data because that's what we're told or trained to do? Can we find other sources? Can we figure out ways to create inclusion first, and then you won't have as many white people, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I know it
In 10 or
obviously
15 or
transcends a huge issue in our country
yeah,
in
right,
general, but
right. But just to, and I'm responding to you because you asked the
Yeah.
question, but it's
Yeah.
a broader kind of construct that I thought was really, really useful.
Well, and how can you listen in a way that's not just data, survey data?
Right. Yeah.
Right, or the typical ways that we, do research, but when you talk, Dylan, about listening to the plants and then speaking back, so you're not just listening, like taking information in, you're talk more about the speaking back process.
Oh, geez. So I think that, and maybe I learned it from you, but, when there's many awful things if you're doing community work. One, you go in and you think you have all the answers. The other is you think that you have no answers. The community has the answer. And maybe it goes to Paulo Freire or who knows. But I mean, there has to be humility and dialogue. Both partners have to kind of enter into dialogue with one another kind of on equal terms. And so for me, I had something that I wanted to get from them. Why was it that I didn't know how to use these plants? Why didn't I have some of this information? So I went to them and actually, listened to people who knew about them, kind of spent lots of time out in the bush and in the woods and kind of, and continue to do so, kind of looking and listening, and this is part of my speaking back, and I think it has to always happen for me in a humble way, like in some sort of collaboration. I could say, and I have said in various talks, that these are actually collaborations with plants, and as someone whose artistic practice is often called social practice, which is about a community where I'll do work with community and we'll make things and do things, but it's not what we make that's important. It's that relationship that's built together. In some ways, I would say the same thing. Like to me, I make these objects, these prints based on the plants, but it's actually that relationship that exists after the fact between me and them now. That's the important part and kind of the long-term one. And I think that listening to the plants and then talking back and having this reciprocal relationship is something that kind of, you know, with urbanization, with kind of, you know, the speed of life, and maybe this is getting at to the, you know, the diss on us middle-aged folk, was that, you know, we're so invested in kind of wage labor and having to do jobs to pay for these things that we don't literally have the time, and with kind of purchasing food frequently at supermarkets, we don't even have the need to know, you know, this information. I mean, you know,
So actually,
on a daily basis, I don't, you know, could I survive if I didn't know, you know, how or when to harvest birch bark? Yeah, I mean, but maybe there's something else once that relationship's created. There's a responsibility on my part to that kind of entity within an ecological system. And I learned that from a friend of ours, a friend of mine, John Hunter, who's a Gamilaroi guy, a Aboriginal dude from Australia. And for him, he learned from his elders that when someone tells you a story, and this gets back to story, it's all about story today. It's story time around the table. But when an elder tells you a story, that knowledge is then your responsibility. You can't gain knowledge and then, you know, and then you could say the same thing about a student. Once a student kind of takes a class and understands something, the onus is on them to develop in a reciprocal way. So when I listened to the plants and they spoke to me, now those plants are my responsibility. So knowledge is both a gift and a burden in some ways. That when you know something and you don't do something positive with it, maybe there's something wrong.
so this sort of, to me, also harkens back to some of what Stuart was saying and what you were saying in terms of, we've talked sometimes about what I call vernacular research, and it turns out that people who are not academics in universities think that they don't do research, but they actually do. And they have it's not only research, but they have all kinds of knowledge. But they've been taught to, as you, I know you all know this, they've been taught to undervalue it. And they've been taught that only certain kinds of knowledge are useful. So it seems to me one of the really interesting things about what you're doing is that you're reconnecting those of us who've lost touch with what I would call vernacular knowledge and research, and showing how that can actually be a kind of liberating relationship. And that I would actually connect to something else which I thought he might be here, but John Warbach, one of the early innovation circles, said something, I can't remember it exactly, but it was along the lines of, it's no longer enough to not do harm. We have to do sustainable good. Like, we don't have time anymore. And I got this, right, and the sense of urgency coming out of the fact that some of these things are unraveling at a pace that could ultimately, you know, not be good for people. And it may not be so good even for the earth and the things that are talking to us. And so I think that what you're proposing and what Australia is talking about and others here have done too is an essential part of figuring out how to not just not do damage, but to how to start to do sustainable good.
Powerful. You left us speechless.
It's been in my head for 6 months.
It was powerful when you said that.
Who was it that said that?
John Warbach, who was on.
He was on the panel at our
Was it
United
United
Innovation,
Innovation, right?
that panel, I think you,
Yeah.
or someone
Bill
facilitated.
Yeah, we
It
had
was
a
really,
panel.
that was a very powerful statement that day. I think a lot of people were like,
What, we have to do good statement, you mean?
yeah.
And that it's not enough. I mean, that it's not enough to not do harm. I mean, so many of our policies and so much of this research assumes we have forever. And eventually we'll get it right or we'll fix it. And that seems not to be necessarily the case.
So John Hunter, I met him, right?
Oh, that's right. You met,
you met Tim.
you met our friend Tim
Oh, I
Knox.
met Tim
Knox.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Part
right.
of the same
They
project,
had worked together
The
for
same
a few years
project,
before.
yeah.
Yeah.
So do they have a special word for that principle of once you know something that you're responsible for?
I always took it as a gift. Like somebody's, and I actually, in my class now, today I'm teaching a class on working with children and young people, and I have practitioners come who are doing work with children and young people, and I say they're gifting us with their time and gifting us with their knowledge. So when somebody is gifting you with something so precious, there's a responsibility and a burden to that. And so when John was talking about that, to me it was really much like a gift, right? It's not like a tool. It's not just handed over to you, but it's a gift, right? So you need to care.
A relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
If you go back to the gift economy,
Exactly.
there's a
There's a
relationship
relationship.
established.
There's a relationship. There's a responsibility. There's some preciousness about it. There's something that it's from heart to heart, and so I feel like people take that much more seriously when they see that you're involved, you're stepping into this reciprocal relationship.
Yeah, it reminds me of my experience in Africa when we first got the Gates. I've never been to Africa or done any work in Africa. And we got funding from the Gates Foundation to work with a university consortium of agriculture universities. It's probably 5 or 6 years ago. And our partners, who actually we knew but didn't know very well, didn't have a relationship, were on the ground. They were like rebelling. Like we got the contract, they were our implementation partners on the ground. And I remember thinking, what did we get ourselves into? Because they were like resisting us and they didn't want to talk to us. And we finally got to the heart of the matter after a couple of days of very uncomfortable conversations. We finally sat down, knee to knee, there were 4 of us, and they finally told us that they didn't trust us because the history of working with people on development projects, especially from universities, was they gift us with their time, they gift us with their knowledge, they gift us with their trust, and once the project over and we write our paper, we are never seen from again. We're not respecting the gift. They didn't use those exact words, but that's what they were talking about.
That's a true story.
It's a true story, I know, it's a true story. So it was just, so we've tried to, this project has gone on, we're now in our, I think, 5th or 6th year. They became the prime, so they were a little bit less concerned because they were in control, what would happen. They weren't as dependent on us, which was a good thing, that was by design when we first got the grant. But that project is starting to come to a close, so I think about that first conversation because it was so painful to finally realize what the issue was and then realize, well, you know what, the bottom line is, am I going to travel here on my own money once this grant's over and keep up these relationships? There are a couple people where the relationship will definitely continue, but most of the people, I can't. I can, but what's my level of personal commitment? What's my give back? What's my relationship? How long is it? What's the purpose? And our relationships don't have to last forever. They could have a special purpose. But thinking of it as a relationship as opposed to a project or a transaction, or I'm listening and reaching out, like sort of labeling it like communicating or outreaching or extension, like how do I get this person to do this? It kind of really changed our thinking. It changed how we designed the project and the interactions and the relationship. So it was really eye-opening for me. It was a really meaningful experience. I was really happy to have it.
There's a wonderful book by Linda Tuiwe Smith, who's a Maori kind of educational scholar. It came out originally in the 90s and in its 2nd edition called Decolonizing Methodologies. I think the subtitle is Research at Indigenous Peoples. But she tells that long kind of very conflictive relationship between Western institutions and Indigenous peoples, and then proposes what she calls 25 Indigenous projects, which are really interesting. It's about kind of who owns the knowledge, how it develops, kind of, and you're seeing kind of the ripples of that text coming out now, even within mainstream universities like MSU.
Because I think that applies not just to our work in Africa, it applies to our work right here in our own state, right in our backyard, right in our own communities. So we should all read that book, Decolonization.
Decolonizing Methodologies.
Yeah.
What I was thinking is, I'm trying to decide if I want to say this out loud.
Okay.
We experience it in our classrooms, right? Our students don't trust us. I go to my students and I think I'm a slightly different kind of teacher because I'm really not so much coming into the classroom ready to fill up their vessels, right, and have them to carry away everything I poured in. But that I think what I sense, and I'm not sure because many of them don't trust me, is they're looking at me as the person who's going to give them a grade. And so that's the primary definer of the relationship. And it doesn't, that sort of atmosphere doesn't encourage trust and collaboration.
Yeah,
And
you're right. So I'm an advocate of removing assessment from the teacher's role. I think teachers should not be the ones who assess. Bill agrees.
No, talk about, I mean, if you think about the
That's work
facilitation of
security
the
for Bill.
relationship. Yeah,
It's
with
a power
people.
relationship.
It is a power relationship, and it's hard to have a power relationship in a vulnerable teaching scenario. I mean, teaching in and of itself is a vulnerable act. You put yourself out there. You know, do I value what you know enough as a teacher? Am I saying it? Sorry.
To some extent, it's also a product of separating assessment according to power. I mean, assessment in
Yeah.
communal situations is done by everybody as you do things.
Right.
And nobody owns assessment.
Yeah. And if we're doing it well, the student or the learner owns it.
Well, that's
And
true of
can do
Ooh,
stories too.
assessment is BlackBerry.
No one really owns
Ooh,
stories because stories really contain, almost
Yeah.
every story that's been passed along contains a significant amount of myth. And yet, when in family situations, it's kind of assumed as a truth, but it's really not, if you really asked and you dug. So the stories contain elements that bind people together in ways, and there's some knowledge in what binds people and why it binds them, but it's not necessarily true.
Well, might be another way to think about that in relation to truth, which when I was in undergraduate, I heard a Vatican theologian talk about the Bible and Jesus, and he compared it to Uncle Charlie stories. And this was pretty shocking to me. And most of the people there were utterly flabbergasted. And he said, everybody's got an Uncle Charlie in the family, and you hear that Uncle Charlie did this and Uncle Charlie did that. And after a few years, you realize Uncle Charlie would have had to have been alive for like 400 years to do all the things people said he did. He said the interesting thing is it really doesn't matter whether Uncle Charlie did those things or not. What's important is what you learn about life and the principles of living through the stories. And when you think about fiction, I mean, people make up stuff, the craziest things, but we learn from that. And there must be some kind of truth that's conveyed in spite of the not sticking to the literal
Right.
sort of truth.
Right.
So there must be layers of truth in stories.
So I think that, like, Psycho maybe needs a byline from Uncle Charlie.
Yeah.
Cigarette?
By Uncle Charlie.
Well, we got plenty of
But
them.
that's, I mean, but teaching and learning in like a formal education setting is sort of a codified version of that, right? We try, I mean, there's research that informs these perspectives, and then we teach them, and we don't teach them. I mean, and it depends on your discipline, but we have ways of teaching them, we have accepted
The classroom's
ways.
such an artificial environment, like what you're doing
Well,
with
that's the
storytelling
problem.
with,
It
you
has
know,
become
youth in a
artificial.
school,
Yeah.
but it's not a class. The way people engage with your experience and the artifacts of that in an exhibit like this. The way people engage with the book and the things that you make to kind of give them the space to reflect and become aware. And what you do with photography and what you do with journalism. It's not, there's so many other ways to engage. I think we create an artificial container around what we call a course that limits our ability to really break those edges a little bit more. And there's mutual expectations of what a course is that limits what we can actually accomplish in the course. I'm an advocate for getting rid of courses. You can record that. Doesn't mean we don't teach. But thinking of it as a course is kind of like making all buildings square, you know? So. Yeah, well, I'm a lone voice kind of.
How do you charge that non-course?
You know,
Full-time fees.
So the
You never
purpose of
get
these-
out.
Full-time.
I think we're kind of, I wanted to leave time for everybody to kind of share reflection before we go, like, you know, pass the talking stick and let everybody sort of reflect. I think we have time for that, so it doesn't have to be too quick, so you can actually share. The purpose of these dialogues really is just to share. There's no like output, no report, no outcome that we have. It's just to seed whatever it is you're already thinking about, or if you can, if you're taking away a reflection or an action or just an observation or a feeling, this is your opportunity just to share it back and be heard. We'll listen. We should just kind of go around in a circle. And Kurt, I'll start with you and we'll go this way.
Well, you know, what I,
Wait, we need a talking stick though. What do we got? The talking pen, maybe? There you go.
It should be edible.
Where's she got it?
It'll never get that smart. It's chocolate, it'll never get that smart. Talking stick's dead.
you know, I just, we hear these, all this common, these common factors that everyone's been talking about, again, the storytelling, and what I enjoy, and I really need to look at your work, Dawn, because I haven't been here yet, and I apologize for that, but I love the philosophy of interacting with the environment and taking that time, and you know, it's such a core fundamental thing that most humans just don't do anymore, and it used to be the way we would get from day to day, and it's such a crucial part of interacting with the environment, and we're in such a, every environment is a huge issue globally because of all the changes that are taking place. I think most of us agree to that. I mean, there's a lot of people in the U.S. that don't, but unfortunately, but you know, the Great Lakes in particular is such a delicate region and such a focal point at this stage in history because of the water issues and the climate issues, and I'm wanna you're making your work and you're talking about the passion and you're talking about your work in the process of the work. It makes me want to slow down and start doing that, because there were times in my life when I thought I did that. Clearly I don't on the level that you do. I want to get closer to that, and that's one thing that I'd like to start incorporating more in this kind of a effort, you know, to engage with these kinds of all of you, you know, experts in your individual areas. It's it's a very inviting prospect to me, and that's basically my warm feeling that I'm getting at this.
That will say, oh.
I agree, and I am taking away a kind of a renewed commitment to slowing down and engaging, and into creating classroom experiences or outside of the classroom experiences where my students can I mean, I guess one of the things I might be qualified to teach, if I'm qualified to teach anything, is the ability to slow down and engage and pay attention to the wild world, because that's something I've been working on deliberately for decades. So I have a renewed commitment to making that part of what happens for my students.
Cool. I hope.
Well, yeah, I thought what everyone was saying about how, you know, sometimes we just go day to day and we don't really look at the issues that are surrounding us, and like, I think that the thought of like taking a second to slow down and interact with the environment is something that's really important. And I also thought that, like everyone was saying, you know, whether it's like art or photography or like the books or even journalism, just taking time to bring these issues like to in a way that like people relate to and like people understand that this affects me too. And because sometimes you do just kind of have to put it in someone's like up front in someone's face so that they can more so see it, when like if you're just going through your daily life, you might just kind of be going from moment to moment, not really like taking the time to think about how these kinds of things affect you.
Oh.
So I guess, I don't know exactly why, but this idea of finding out how things speak to you is resonating really strong with me. And first I thought I'd mostly do that orally. Like, I'm really interested in sort of like what's the sound of a building, but behind that I have this notion, and somebody once told me something, that you need to find the name of things. Not the name you already know, but the name that makes them distinct and unique. And I kind of relate that to this, and sometimes when I'm working on photography, I'm really interested in photographing something that literally can't be photographed. And you know, a really simple version of that would be like, how do you photograph grief? Well, you can't literally. And there are other things too. So like the environment, it's very easy to take a picture of an island. But how do you take a picture of what that island means? Or what's distinctive about it? Or use your word, how do you take a photograph of what it's telling you? And so those questions, I think, are starting to be more important to me, and maybe I also attach it to this. I mean, not only am I not going to be around very much longer, which, you know, who knows how long that is, but I started wondering about the world, and I really think I have to kind of put some of my concerns on the back burner, because if I want to contribute something to the world and people, it has to be here. So like some of these difficulties are taking more and more priority, because I think I can't really behave as if things are going to go on forever. Somehow it'll all work out. I kind of think it's forcing me to establish a different set of priorities and to say, well, you know, the earth comes first in a way.
Oh. So I wanted to mention too, Mark's photographs of Cuba are up at the Hannah Center Gallery. They went up on Sunday. And they'll be up there for a month, right? Month of February?
Till the 25th.
Mm-hmm. So if you want to see pictures of joy, grief, islands, they're all up.
It's also a really nice space, and they're looking for people for exhibiting. So if you know people, it's a wonderful person to work with who runs it, and they, you know, it's relatively modest fee, and they're looking for people, not big names. They're looking for teenagers, you know, kids who want to get their art shown. So it's a very committed community kind of space.
Let's see, my takeaway is just gratefulness for everybody sharing their perspectives, because I like conversations that have to do with listening, and not just from your senses, but a lot of you guys shared your perceptions and feelings from the heart, listening with the heart, listening with the senses that are not the physical senses, speaking back in other modes than what we typically experience, you know, in the middle-aged suburban academic life. So it's refreshing, and I thank you for sharing it.
Well, I appreciate what everybody has had to share, and I like there's a space where you can actually just sit down and have a dialogue that goes, you know, it can go wherever it wants to go.
We only have one table.
But I think for me, this was just kind of invigorating, thinking about, I don't know, the work that I do, and then the way, I guess, society and these institutions kind of operate, and that, you know, in a lot of ways there needs to be new paradigm shifts, but how can art, these other things that people can really connect with, not just here's a report or the statistics show blah, 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 but just getting to something more meaningful, and how can I take that back into what I do, where it's a little bit more rigid to incorporate that kind of stuff. So I feel inspired and agree, again, with things everybody else has said, so.
I hope.
So, as I was saying in my introduction, this is the first time I actually have heard Dylan talk about these pieces, because despite us being married, I don't get to hear his talk a lot, because just our schedules conflict. But it was nice to hear him talk about his prints, and it's nice to, I appreciate the conversation was had, but I also am really thinking about that quote that Mark quoted somebody else saying, but it's not enough to do harm, or it's not enough to not do harm, but to work on sustainable good. I mean, I think that's a lot to think through and work through, and I mean, how can my work fit into that, and how can the things that I'm doing and hoping to do fit into that? I'll be processing that for a while, but that's a big responsibility, right? It's no longer just saying, you know, I'm not going to work today, or I'm going to recycle, which I do those things, but it's like, okay, now I've got to up my game. like significantly, and what does that look like? And how do you do that, right? It is reprioritizing your values. So yeah, but I'll be taking that with me. And so thanks, Mark, and thanks, John. Warlock.
He'll be happy when he's here in spirit. He wanted to come, but he's traveling, so he couldn't come. I hope.
I'm struck by the sense of commons. So you talked about the commons of the berries, wild berries. I like that metaphor. I like the use of that the berries became ink. I like that ink, binds us through these academic circles, I guess. And then I'm struck and thankful, Allison, that you brought your books, which remind me of coffee table books. I don't know if they're supposed to be, but where you're visiting someone and that's the common space, and you can page through and share ideas and perspectives. Sorry, you were. Oh, yeah. Just so the multiple perspectives on the land are really that we maybe begin to share. I know that those are the contradictions that occur for me a lot. The multiple perspectives that we then share, because we're used to finding the one dominant narrative or listening or hearing that one over and over. It's harder. I think that's the thing I struggle with here, and then also am struck by here is multiple perspectives that we then share.
Oh.
Well, my mind went on a wild tangent right from the get-go. When Dylan talked about like how much narrative do you give to the art, and so how much do you explain the ambiguity, and so I'm kind of interested in not the shared perspective, but the unknown perspectives, that haven't yet been surfaced. And I think there's a lot of power in that ambiguity, and that's the unexamined problems. And I think that's, and I have no idea where it's going. It may go somewhere eventually, but that's where I started. It's like, yeah, this is really interesting kind of space here, and I guess I lean toward leaving that ambiguity to surface and not trying to explain so much.
Oh.
I'm still stuck on something that Estrella said a while ago about treating those transactions that you have as gifts. That you take so many of those things for granted, or you do treat them just like transactions, and that there's a responsibility. I thought that really got me thinking about that. That was pretty powerful.
You get the final
Oh, I get the
reflection.
oh man. Hopefully it's not like a respondent on a panel where I have to
No,
bring everything
no, no.
together and just
Tie
tie it all back together. Because it's been pretty open-ended and pretty powerful to listen to the different perspectives and ideas, and all think about how they're related back to both the theme of this, which is art ecology in the Great Lakes, all kind of thinking back about the creative process and academic processes as well. For me, I think like Estrella, that the quote that Mark gave earlier about John Warbach, how to do sustainable good, or at least that second part of it, I think will definitely go with me. And so as we've been talking about stories, and stories being about kind of listening and speaking and being reciprocal, and Estrella's thinking about the gifts, I'm thinking that I've never met John, but now he and I have a relationship. Just as I try to listen to the plants, or I try to listen to the water, now I've listened to John even though I've never met him. There's these kind of interesting, for me as artists, as working in a university, many people write academic stuff too. It's like it has a circulatory system that goes out there outside of us, and there's something amazing to that as we get knowledge and create stuff, there's a responsibility. And this is also what I'm thinking about all the time is, what is my responsibility as a scholar and as an artist when you make something? On the one hand, once you make it, it's out there and it takes on a life of its own. But on another hand, kind of in its creation and production, you can kind of have some sort of hand in shaping. So I'm not certain where that leads me after this, but it's definitely going to be kind of thinking about how to do sustainable good, kind of through arts projects and through my own teaching.
And then I'm going to end that, as we're doing the go-around, Mark mentioned the idea of naming and listening to the names of things. Part of what I did on Rabbit Island this summer was kind of listen to everything speaking there, but it was also listening to the name of that island. So my 3 collaborators on the island, basically we found some old documents and kind of spoke with community folks, and basically the Anishinaabe-Mawin title for the island is Ni Ajawam Minis, and Ni is a prefix that means our, and Minis means island. But that middle word there, the middle part of the word has to do with kind of temporarily kind of crossing over. It was an island that was meant as a temporary space. It was never meant to be permanently lived on. It actually helps you cross over from the tip of the Keweenaw and cut off, miles of canoe travel. And for me, like listening to that actually made me understand the island and my own personal, and those of us working on the island, our own temporarily provisional stop on it. And I started thinking about, one of the things that often happens when things are renamed is that those older names, which often can tell us something about the ecology or use or, a variety of other things, fall away. So it's, for me, I started thinking as you're talking about, how I can actually listen to the land speak and tell me maybe its name.
Beautiful.
If I can
Ooh,
just
this is so
add,
good. Sure, Mark?
John
Oh.
Warnock speaking in Australia.
Oh, John.
So actually, I was doing what I think she was saying. So when he said that in that panel, I was kind of at the point in the day where I was wondering if this was just going to be sort of a collapse of dialogue. And when he brought that up, I was really like, wow, he's taking things to the next level in this discourse. And I was both kind of awed and really happy that he was taking that step. So I felt like that was a gift. And like I have to, part of the reason that I talk about this is because I feel like I owe that to him and his effort, and he gave me something by doing that in that moment. And so I have to keep propelling it. And so I'm
And then
really
now
glad
I'll definitely share that gift, kind of, and then it links me back to Mark
Yeah.
and back to John now.
As opposed to like a challenge, right? Like I challenge you to take it to the, no, because a challenge then there's like the power dynamic, right? Whereas if it's a gift, it's like you and I are peers. We're invested in this relationship. So because a lot of times you hear people who are having like they're speaking at youth conferences and things like, I challenge our youth. It's like, well, who are you to challenge the youth, right? That's not how you engage in this reciprocal relationship. But it's like, I'm gifting you this. I'm trusting you with this,
Absolutely.
right? You're in part of this relationship.
It also passes then the responsibility on. It's like,
Well, it doesn't.
I can give you a gift. What you do with it, that's on you.
But you still have parts of that gift with you, right? You pass it on, but it's not like you're completely saying, all right, I'm absolving myself. Like, all right, I screwed up the earth. Good luck, guys. Like, I did this to it.
But I think in terms of our work here at MSU Global, this gift notion maybe could be a design principle for the food knowledge, or no, it's now called the Food Knowledge Lab that Jerry's leading. It is really meant to be more like a campaign for awareness and enabling people's more informed choices. And we said, oh, should we have challenges? And I'm thinking, wait, maybe this opens up a window for a whole nother way to think about how to organize the engagement, the whole notion of it. It's such a different place if it's a gift. So I thank you for that.
One difference I hear in that, I'm sorry to be
The man behind the curtain here.
Couldn't help it.
Storyteller.
But
Well, come into the circle, Shad.
yeah, okay.
There you go.
Might as well put
Here,
yourself in your
I'll
own
tape
picture.
you. I'll tape you. Go ahead. You can sit down.
Just do a selfie. Just put
I did. I flipped it around.
I got you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
As I make my appearance in the basis.
You're like Woody Allen.
No, but one thing that I think is, at least what I hear, and the difference between the challenge and the gift, is that with the challenge, the motivation is external. So you're presenting the motivation to do it, and it's not coming from within. But with the gift, you do have that obligation to internalize it and live with the obligation of, if should I do something or what do I do with this? And you know, so you have to take responsibility for committing to some action. So it's intrinsic. That's my point.
Well, with that, we will close. I want to thank you all for a beautiful hour and a half. Thank you.